it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings. Accordingly, the Land Use Advisory Committee members will participate in this meeting by telephone or interactive technology, and this Land Use Advisory Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. And with that, I will call to order the what is today, January 20th, 2022 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. And Sandy, will you call the roll?
Sure. We are going to start with Sadi Abdi. I don't see her. John Bodema.
Present.
Gerald Bruner. I see Jerry. We've heard from Jerry. Are you unmuted, Jerry?
Oh, yeah, hi, I'm here.
Okay, Carl Drotning. I don't see Gerald or Carl. Jennifer Geisler. Not yet. April Graves. Kathy Hemken.
I'm here.
Noah Keller.
Here.
Phil Klein.
Here.
Trista Maticastillo.
I'm here.
Yep, she's here. Kathy Mokel.
Here.
Steve Morris.
Here.
Mark Nelson. No. Mitra Jalali. Dan Rowe. Bill Drost.
Here.
And Wendy Wulff. You're muted, Wendy.
I'm here, sorry.
Okay.
Bill's last name is Drosty, not Drost.
Oh,
That's
hey,
fine.
I've only known him for like 10 years. I'm sorry, Bill. Why didn't you ever say anything to me?
I answer to anything.
Anything but you're late for dinner, right?
Correct.
Late for dinner. All right.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Bill. Thank you.
So the agenda is considered approved unless people have objections. Does anybody have an objection to the posted agenda? Seeing none, we will consider the agenda approved. The next thing is the approval of the minutes from the November 18th, 2021 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. Do we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Phil Klein, I so moved the approval.
We have a second.
Bodema.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, can you call the roll on the minutes, please?
Sure. We'll start again with Sadi Abdi. John Bodema.
Yay.
Gerald Bruner.
Hey,
Carl Drotning. Jennifer Geisler. April Graves. Kathy Hemken.
Hey.
Noah Keller.
Aye.
Phil Klein.
Hey.
Trista Maticastillo.
Hi.
Kathy Mokel.
Hi.
Steve Morris.
Aye.
Mark Nelson. Mitra Jalali. Dan Rowe.
Aye.
Bill Drosty.
Hi.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
Wendy Wulff.
Thank you.
Aye. So the
All
minutes
right.
are approved. Our first item of business, pardon?
I said you can teach an old dog new tricks. There we go.
The first item of business is, pardon?
Wendy, this is Jenny. I took a little longer to get on my audio, so I'm here as well.
Okay,
Well,
good.
we'll add you as an aye for the minutes.
And I see
Okay, good.
Dan Rowe is here now as well too.
Yes.
Correct.
Good deal.
Okay. So first item of business is the appointment of the vice chair for the Land Use Advisory Committee, and Phil has graciously agreed to continue in that role if it's amenable to the rest of you. So we would need a motion and a second for his appointment.
So moved.
Okay, so we got Jerry and then Trista as the second. And you could call the roll, Cindy.
All right. We'll start again with Sadi Abdi, Jonathan Bodema,
Yay.
Gerald Bruner,
Aye.
Carl Drotning. Still not here. Jennifer Geisler.
Carl is here. He said aye. He
Oh,
just
he is
signed in.
there. Okay,
I can't
good.
figure out my stupid button.
All right. Jennifer Geisler,
Aye.
April Graves, Kathy Hemken,
Yes.
Kathy Mokel.
Aye.
Oops, I jumped ahead there. Noah Keller,
Aye.
Philip Klein.
I should probably recuse myself.
I think
You
should
can vote
probably
for
say
yourself.
yes.
It's okay.
Okay, aye.
Trista,
Aye.
Steve Morris,
Aye.
and Mark Nelson. Is he shown? No. And Jalali or Mitra Jalali, not yet. Dan Rowe
Aye.
and Bill Drost
Aye.
and Wendy Wulff.
Aye.
All right.
Congratulations, Phil. You're reappointed as vice chair.
Thank you,
Next
Wendy.
up is the work plan. Nothing's changed since the preview that we had at last meeting. Does anybody want to make any discussion about the work plan, or can we just go ahead and approve it? Approve it? Okay. Need a motion?
Steve Morris, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Joe Klein, second.
Thank you. Can you call the roll, please, Sandy?
Will do. Gerald Bruner,
Aye.
Carl Drotning.
Aye.
Oh, I think I forgot Jonathan Bodema,
Aye.
Jennifer Geisler,
Aye.
April Graves, still not here. Kathy Hemken,
Yes.
Noah Keller,
Aye.
Phil Klein,
Aye.
Trista Maticastillo,
Aye.
Kathy Mokel,
Aye.
Steve Morris.
Aye.
We'll jump down to Dan Rowe,
Aye.
Bill Drost,
Aye.
Wendy Wulff.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So next up would be the 2040 debrief of the comprehensive plan review process. Patrick Boylan is presenting. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi, Chair Wulff, if I could interject just for a moment quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Wulff and committee members. I just wanted to take a quick moment. Patrick is going to be your primary presenter today, and just wanted to say a huge thanks to Patrick and the project team for the incredible amount of work that they've done on this project. I'm actually really excited to hear, for you to hear from them again about their efforts. I wanted to take a moment just to make a quick connection for the committee on to the regional planning process, which you'll start to hear about regularly starting today after Patrick's presentation. You'll probably remember that we presented here last spring to talk about the Comprehensive Plan Composite, which was a broad analysis from local comprehensive plans that touched on all of the system and policy areas, housing, land use, and other components. The Comp Plan Composite tells us about planning outcomes from local governments as identified in their comprehensive plans. And the project that Patrick will be sharing with you today, the 2040 Comp Plan Debrief, tells us how we did in providing technical assistance to support those local planning efforts. We want to capture how the review process went while it was still fresh in people's minds. So that's why Patrick and his team started work when they did. We want to be able to apply what we've learned in the next cycle while we're still working to close out the last planning cycle. So I'll turn that over to Patrick to share more with you again about the Debrief project. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. And Chair Wulff, can you hear me okay? Okay, so one.
We can.
I'm going to say it's yes. Great, appreciate that. So today's presentation is going to update you on the status of the Dbeef project we discussed last summer in July. I was here before you. Since we met, the team analyzed the focus group data we heard, we received, and the survey data, and we've got some conclusions and recommendations to share, some highlights of that for you. Before I get into that, I want to take a minute and introduce the key product team members that I worked with over the last year or so. Jake and Caitlin, if you can turn your cameras on real quick. I think you have met Caitlin before at a presentation she did, I think last year. And I just want to state my appreciation for her analytical skills, which are really the key kind of piece of a lot of the recommendations that you're going to hear and that we're still kind of in draft form we're developing. The other key team member is Jake Riley, and I'll note that as we're evaluating, our outreach effectiveness or efficacy, his skills and engagement communication were really crucial to the final project's recommendations. So just a big thank you to both of them for a little over a year's worth of hard work. So thank you. Kind of through this project, we initiated a review of technical assistance, the council review process. Again, it's a 2040 review process. And we did this primarily by engaging with local governments and other stakeholders, primarily internal stakeholders, the tech reviewers. Next slide, please. Thanks. So if you recall, this project took a close look at the processes in reviewing the 2040 comp plans. And the guiding philosophy for this was reflective. And we tried our best to use this reflective approach grounded in humility, truly. And as a quick reminder, the purpose of the project was to look closely at resources we provided to local planners and review all the procedures for the 2040 planning process. A key portion, of course, was to engage the local governments, as I said before, and also stakeholders kind of about their experiences, with us as local planning assistants and the council in general. And the surveys, we had one-on-one conversations and focus groups, and we even had a focus group here at LUAC last July. I just want to say that the comp planning is arduous. It truly, truly is. And not all cities love us, except for the communities in Wendy's district. They all love us, right? No. It's for comp plans, we, the council, we are regulators. And most jurisdictions had challenges. And we need to repair those relationships. There's definitely some not so happy feelings out there. And so a lot of the efforts of what we did here was to do just that, not just gather what people's experiences were and how we can do better, but also just to start the communication, start the relationship repair process. Really an important part of what Angela's team does, myself and my other colleagues in local planning assistance. So the goal of the project was to be intentionally explore what went well and what didn't, and develop specific recommendations and process improvements. Again, the mantra among myself and the Debrief team was keep your ears open, keep your mouth shut, and kind of like, the directions for using sunscreen, remember to apply a dollop of humility from time to time, just to go through it. Next slide, please. There's 6 kind of parts to the project that I'll talk about briefly. We received 111 online survey responses. These are mostly from planning directors and city planners, but some from consultants. But also we heard from city managers, some administrators, and some elected officials and engineers. Last spring, we had 65 one-to-one conversations. So I work in districts 13, 14, 15, and 16. And so 16 is Wendy's district. So I made either phone calls or had, team or, Zoom type conversation just to ask what went well, what didn't go well, and just to kind of gather that data. And so that's a component of two. So we did the surveys, we did these one-to-ones, and we did these focus groups as well. And just last summer, before I spoke to you last, we had partnered with Metro Cities. We hosted 4 focus groups, which engaged over 21 local planners and consultants. And last September, we also held 3 internal focus groups. Again, earlier in the summer was the focus groups for the external folks, and the later part of the summer, early fall, were 3 internal focus groups. So sector reps and the technical reviewers to ask the same kind of questions too. I met with the CDC, presented them just 2 days ago, and we're engaging with Metro Cities later this month, or perhaps early in February. And we're going to finalize our set of recommendations to identify specific actionable process improvements. Next slide, please. So where you come in is here, and I'll repeat this slide later. But as I'm sharing our conclusions and sample recommendations, I really invite everyone here to think about some of these questions before us. Given that we've talked to you last July about this, we're interested in knowing whether what you hear today rings true. And I want you to help us identify, or challenge you to help us identify anything that seems to be missing. And as policymakers and practitioners, are there specific thoughts you have on what would be helpful in the upcoming planning cycle? So after my presentation, real quick, you're going to hear from my colleague Raya Smiley, and she's going to be talking about community designations, which is really an important part of LUAC's work. And so this might be a good sort of grounding and provide some good context for some of that work too. So I just want to kind of throw that in real quick as the next item on the agenda today, and then later on this year you'll be hearing from Raya about community designations. So do these findings that I'm talking about today, do they match your experience? Are there any gaps? And you have specific ideas for us to talk about. Next slide, please. Real quick overview on things that went well. We kind of compiled this. And stakeholders express appreciation for the resources, including the local planning handbook, and especially information available on the community pages. If you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend it. Really good stuff there. And specific attention was called to the checklist, minimum requirements, and mapping and data resources. A lot of information packed into each of those individual pages. And there's components of the Planet program. That is a in-depth training piece that we have that's part of our handbook. And especially what was called in attention was the conference we held in December of 2016 was praised. Local planners and consultants also shared the opportunity to submit plans with a preliminary review before the official deadline was helpful. But in our outreach, we did find that there's room for improvement in communicating expectations about the extent of these preliminary reviews. The planning grants we had and the sector programs were viewed positively. Jurisdictions where the council staff presented to city councils or planning commissions early in the process felt that connection was helpful in the long run. And for myself, I think areas where I connected well with my cities, I had a chance to do that. In areas where maybe I could have done better, I was a little thin on that. And I'm speaking for myself in districts 12, 13, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So finally, just kind of add that process components like the new online submittal portal for comp plans was praised as well. Next slide, please. Now for the fun stuff. What didn't go so well? Stakeholders shared frustrations with the incomplete letters. Some of you here maybe have seen one, depending on your role in your community now or your previous role in the community, and you're aware of some of the local staff's frustration with the council and the council staff. Local stakeholders also identified a need to simplify and add some flexibility in the planning process, and especially for smaller communities where there was little growth or no growth and very few regional resources. The suggestion came to us that supporting these communities might be good by reducing the number of overall requirements or providing additional resources or technical assistance or all the above. And there's some challenges to some of the plan elements, which, quite frankly, we heard over and over again. And that, the key ones were inflow and infiltration. That was a challenge that we heard many times. The housing requirements, and then calculating the residential densities in mixed-use districts, we also heard a lot about. Finally, stakeholders felt the council should have provided greater clarity on the reasoning behind requirements and kind of what our expectations were for them. How would they meet them? And also express some frustration is being understanding about what the connections are between the plan elements and the distinction between sort of what's required for sure and then what's sort of the nice to have information that we would like to see in a comp plan. Next slide, please. So the summary information and the recommendations kind of boil into 4 kind of general categories. There's some overlap here a little bit, but generally speaking, we specifically we developed these 4 categories. And given the feedback from our internal and external stakeholders, the following broad categories are: improve communication, evaluate planning resources, expanding technical assistance, and focus on quality assurance and quality control. Next slide, please. Kind of for the first category here is improving communications. And to accomplish this, the recommendations in the report, that we're developing, focus on improving the various exchanges between local partners and council staff. Again, the phone calls I get or the emails or whatever, just to kind of walk people through what we need and how to connect various elements is important. This includes guidance on sort of communication norm and development of internal communications channels, again, inside the building or inside between my colleagues who work for the council. With just promote efficiency and collaboration is a key thing. Our recommendations to improve communication during the plan review process include both sector reps and council members should meet with jurisdiction staff and elected official or appointed officials more often during the planning process. Again, during the run-up to the 2040 process, Wendy and I attended the Dakota County Township Officers Association in the fall and in the spring, in the years running up to and during the actual review process. And, granted, for the collaborative plan and the smaller communities in Dakota County, it was not a perfect process by any means, but I think that helped. And so that can be seen as sort of, okay, for myself, I'll speak for myself. I wish I could have, I wish I would have done more of that with other communities. I think it would have helped in the long run. Another recommendation is to explore opportunities to ensure incomplete letters clearly communicate how and why to address policy and consistency issues. Again, we heard that in the focus groups, and that came out in some of the surveys we had in the open-ended questions. And finally, we're looking at convening an advisory group of local planners and consultants to provide feedback on development of the requirements, the checklist for the 2050 process. Again, it's sort of that going out in the field. What do you think? Here's what we have. Here's what we have to work. We, the council. Here's what we have to work with. What do you think? What would be helpful for you? And to do that early in the process, so as we're developing requirements checklists, that there's some buy-in locally. There's some understanding of what's going on. They're certainly not going to like everything we have to, or we ended up requiring cities to do. But when there's some familiarity and some ownership and buy-in, that should go a long way. Next slide, please. For the evaluate planning resources, this includes recommendations for the development of templates, data, and other guiding documents to best support local governments in their conference planning efforts. The handbook is seen as a valuable resource, of course, and we want to continue to add value to it by updating information, cleaning up old links, adding new relevant information, making sure communities understand what that is, and checking with them to find out how relevant that is and if they're using it, and keep it as a dynamic handbook. Keep the dynamic as one more time. Keep the handbook as dynamic as possible so it's useful in its use. Because focus group participants asked us to more clearly outline the review process early in the planning cycle, some of these new resources could include graphics outlining the review process, information on the council itself, and comp planning with local staff and consultants could then learn about that and then share that with their policymakers and elected officials. And resources that effectively explain completeness, conformance, consistency, and compatibility with regional system policy to develop more information about that, to make that understood and make that connection between local planners and what they need to do for the 2050 plans and then their policymakers. Next slide, please. The next category, broad category, we've developed a recommendations is called expand technical assistance. And the recommendations include addressing areas of improvement related to how council staff can assist our regional partners. They represent ideas that combine ways to improve effective communications with the end goal resulting in proactive and personalized assistance. Again, it's that one-on-one meeting. We're in pandemic now, unlikely to happen anytime soon, but with all hopes, that will end and I'll get to be out in city halls again. Maybe even bugging Mayor Drosty, who knows? Anyway, if that's not possible, of course, or some sort of hybrid is the way of the future, then it's the Teams meeting, the Zoom meeting, et cetera, just to kind of really check in with folks. Recommendation to expand this include more local governments to participate in the preliminary reviews. Again, as I said earlier, that was seen as a really successful thing, and we want to encourage more people to do it. Not every city took advantage of that, and so we think that that's something that since we heard from our local planners that was a good thing, they want to get out there and say, hey, last round it was a good thing. You should do it this time. Sector reps should meet with local governments before plan writing begins to talk through the planning process, the council requirements, and other essential information. The council staff finally need to provide more examples to the local governments during the plan review, development review process. Later in the process, in the 2040 process, we had a number of communities who were wondering about widely available housing tools. And so one of our housing staff folks, Hillary Lovelace, was really helpful in sort of helping pass out information to other communities, what similar cities had done. Hey, this is what they did. Here, take a look at if you're a third ring suburban community, here's what other suburban community did in the third ring that maybe you'll find helpful, is to do that maybe throughout the entire process. And even in the case of this recommendation, before the process even begins, to kind of start talking through that and helping folks. Next slide, please. Focus on quality assurance and quality control. It's kind of a final key component of the project. And it's where we examine where staff could improve, processes and tools and methods to our internal, external interactions. The recommendations suggest evaluating existing and future processes to allow for sort of a continuous improvement, kind of before, during, and after the comp plan process. Again, we're in the early stages of this 2050 process. We'll be issuing system statements in less than 4 years. So now's the time to start thinking about it, and we are. So one of the recommendations is to ensure that all council staff can communicate the why behind requirements in their technical areas. In the focus groups, we heard that the checklists were considered to be overly complex, and we're committed to addressing this. That's I'm sure a frustrating thing at the local level to look at a checklist of requirements and be overwhelmed by what needs to be done. So that's something, an area we can improve. Comp planning was difficult for local planners, to be certain, and to be sure at times overwhelming for the council of technical reviewers as well. So an important recommendation from our work is that the council managers develop work plans that allow sector representatives and tech reviewers to prioritize reviews for the 2050 process. Next slide, please. Building on these preliminary findings and recommendations, the team is working with Metro Cities in continued partnership to identify further improvements to the plan review process. I'll be working with them, with Metro City staff, to develop and coordinate a longer-term technical work group focused on regional planning and comprised of local government technical staff. And we'll share this findings and recommendations project as one of our first projects together, or tasks together, rather. And much like today's presentation discussion, we also plan to update the partners who contributed throughout the past year, not only internal to the council, but our external partners as well, the local planners who took the time to not only do surveys, but also the folks who showed up for focus groups. The project team is going to also finalize a report that incorporates feedback we received today. We received some feedback on Tuesday at the CDC meeting, but also feedback from Metro Cities too. And we'll be folding that into the final report and developing our final recommendations. And finally, we're working, the team is going to develop, is going to prioritize and implement recommendations to improve the comp plan review process before the start of the next review cycle. Next slide, please. So again, back to these discussion steps for you, or discussion questions for you. As a reminder, I only gave you a snippet, a little couple examples from each of the 4 areas we kind of covered in terms of our conclusions and recommendations and summary. And so the question for you and the discussion before us now is, does this match your experience? Are there any gaps, or do you have some specific things I can hear about you now for resource or technical assistance? And with that, I'm available for any questions or discussion.
Thanks, Patrick. Who would like to go first? Questions, comments? Go ahead, Steve.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. Hey, I do just want to echo the findings on there. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that we had in the city of Woodbury was almost a non-relationship with the council. From a staff standpoint, we begged and begged to hear from our rep, and we had a little bit of changeover and turnover in the rep as well due to some health things. But that made things extraordinarily difficult throughout the process and throughout really what the approval process was for us, because obviously the process takes many, many years. But that hands down the number one complaint from the city staff and those of us that were on the committee was a lack of communication throughout the process. And then once we submitted, then we're rolling. But it was the process before that. The communication with our rep was almost none. So other than that, everything matches.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead,
Sure.
Dan.
This is actually kind of a question. One of the areas that seem to receive positive feedback and is recommended to be focused on is encouraging more people to do the preliminary review. Do we have a sense as to if communities use that preliminary review process, were they less prone to have incomplete letters, or perhaps have less issues, fewer issues, or less complex issues to deal with if they were receiving incomplete letters? I was just curious about that, and I'm not sure if our city had done the preliminary review. I'm checking with staff on that, but I was just curious if you had some of those global kind of statistics or general impressions.
Patrick, do you have a response?
Yeah, I do. So Mr. Rowe and Wendy, and I have a couple thoughts, and then I'd like to hear Angela hear her thoughts too. No, we don't have any specific statistics that I know of. Angela might have something she's pulled together. I don't. Generally speaking, yes. If someone did submit a preliminary review, it's not that they had fewer incomplete letters, but that the process just went smoother. The expectation, understanding that, yeah, this I&I is really tough stuff. We're trying to figure this out, and we're really, our engineering staff is really great, but it's really a difficult thing. And incomplete letter. And it seems to be the tenor, the tone, or the relationship between the council staff and then the local staff seem to be better. This is just my impression. Places where they didn't do an incomplete letter, or preliminary review, there's a lot of surprise at the number of things that were incomplete. Certainly those first incomplete letters for almost every city were multiple pages, detailed, multiple pages. And those who didn't do a preliminary review were really taken aback by that. Those who had done a preliminary review sort of knew what was coming. And so, I don't know, Angela, do you have something to add to that?
I think you covered most of it, Patrick. I think the one of the key parts of the preliminary reviews was it was another point of communication between the council and local governments, where we could really kind of set expectations and work through problems really early on, especially if they were anticipating some system additions or other policy changes that would impact their community. So that's what I would add.
Thanks for that feedback. I think the reason I asked the question is that might be a point to use to promote to people who didn't do the preliminary review, is your incomplete process might be less of an issue or less painful if you do the preliminary review, to the extent we know that's the case.
Can I add one follow-up to that, Chair?
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, just one follow-up thing to that. In my presentation, I was careful to say, yep, people loved it, but we need to manage our expectations for that, because we got the preliminary reviews. We said, hey, we're going to take a month and we're going to do a very high-level review. Is your water resources plan in conformance with because that's a big problem. Is your transportation plan, is it conform with transportation policy plan? Regional park, same thing. Housing for a policy, water supply for housing, all these sort of things for our policies and our systems. We just did a high-level review. So some people were actually surprised. They came back and said, hey, we did a preliminary review. How come it's incomplete? Like, well, okay, we didn't do the actual nuts and bolts granular sort of review that we are supposed to under state statute for state law. So the expectation management will be to really explain this is a very high-level system and policy review only. That's it for conformance and consistency. That's it. You're bound to have other things that we're not going to really relate back to you. And so I think places where we did explain that, we're successful. Other places where we didn't explain that very well, the expectation management or communication management kind of suffered, I think.
Did you have any follow-ups, Dan, or is that good?
That's
Jerry?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Jerry.
Yes. I'm on the 2050 planning, and so I talked to people throughout the county here in Carver, Chan, Chaska, Victoria, and Waconia. They all said the same thing about Met Council planning. They say that the information that you always request for comp plans is so redundant in these cities that it costs them tens of thousands of dollars to have staff send the same information they sent on the previous comp plan. So they would like the Met Council to kind of streamline their requests for these comp plans for cities like, some of these cities in Carver County, because the information is going to be the same as it was on the previous comp plan. And this money could be better spent on other things in their cities. So could you address that, please? So I have something to say to them.
Patrick?
Sure. I'm looking for Angela to weigh in on this one too. I agree. I think there's some things there's lots of things we can do as staff and as an institution to streamline the process. And I think, again, it's this communication and expectation management to say, here are the things we absolutely need. If it's exactly the same as before, to explain, there's going to be situations where it seems that way, but perhaps it's a little different, and we need something a little bit different because we don't have the framework anymore. We have something called Thrive, and in 2050, we're going to have another document, and we're going to have different transportation plan, different water resource plan, different parks and regional trail plan, and then there's some nuance there. Now, we can definitely help cities say, hey, last time we said this time we're saying this. Here's the difference. Here's the increment. This is what we want you to do. Focus on this. We can definitely. It's what Jerry had said is very similar to what we've heard other places as well.
Angela?
I would just add that what kind of committee member is talking about is what we hear a lot in our small communities. And I know that the county has a lot of very small communities. And so we would take the information that we did receive about that from the debrief that Patrick's talking about and apply that to how we help serve small communities in the next round. We are talking about some new programs that might help with that and some ways to provide direct technical assistance. So we're kind of batting around all kinds of ideas to address those comments.
And I would add that council members have talked about having a comp plan update light version for smaller communities. We've talked about it for, I don't know, the whole time I've been on the council, and I've been there for 12 years, but we haven't actually implemented that. I mean, we've had some more resources available, but some of the requirements don't really apply to really small communities. And yet I think state law requires comp plan updates no matter how big your community is. But to the extent that we can alleviate that pain and extra work for things that don't change much, yeah, it's something that we need to do. Carl.
Good afternoon. I think we're fortunate in Lakeville that we pay someone to do it, and we sublet it. We're a large enough community. It's an added expense. However, the other half of that is most communities are not overstaffed as it is, and this adds one. If you're managing a lot for our regular staff, they're managing the growth and the development and all those kind of things. So this does add a huge time burden. So once again, we subcontract it and we work with a specialist on it so that we can try and do the best we can to get it done in a timely manner. And the larger communities may have that luxury, the smaller ones don't. So the comp plan light is I'm sure would be something that would be embraced happily. And I think sometimes some of the compliance requirements are somewhat onerous and draconian as far as some of the things that they look at. And back to your point earlier in the presentation, anything that can be done on the council side to lighten the load and provide a little more guidance on the front end, saying if you have this, 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 and this, we're good. so that they don't have those surprises, because it's, it's like working with a legal document. You send it over, then you get it back, and then you send it over and you get it back. And, trying to avoid that, I think, would make it much less of a burden.
Bill, did you have something?
Yes, first of all, Patrick, I think you did a great job here. It identifies the issues, but the one area that I would put emphasis on, and you stated it twice, is the why area. On our console, we have 3 of 5 members have never been involved with the city. They're elected, and their perception is, yes, this Met Council's out there and this planning, why haven't we studied various transportation, sewer, etc.? And they have no knowledge. So I'd say beginning with the system statements, make sure you have a strong why the Met Council's putting these numbers out and why we're planning. And then through that process, especially if there's an election and you have turnovers in some cities, I'd highly suggest reconnecting, make sure they understand the why. So when you get to the end, it's not conflict, especially from the elected side. On the technical and staff, like Carl and Jerry stated, people are engaged, they understand all this. So
I'd add that I agree. I appreciate you saying that, Mayor Drosy. There's some in the staff, there's some retirement that's gone on, and in the next few years, there'll be some more, and some younger planners coming on, or perhaps people coming in from outside the metro where the Land Planning Act doesn't apply. So I think there's a need to do the Met Council Comp Planning 101 dog and pony show, over the next few years. Certainly around the system statement time is appropriate, I think.
And one comment there, especially on population numbers, periodically you get involved, and I always have to explain to people, they're very accurate at a region and at a state, maybe a county. If you left it to the cities to come up with the numbers, we'd be all over the map, and that's just hard for people to understand.
Well, I remember at the beginning of this round of comp plan business, when we gave the forecast to Edina, they were like, no, there's no possible way we can accommodate that many people. And then all of a sudden, people started building apartment buildings like crazy in Edina, and they actually do have the growth that we said there was going to be. So yeah, there is some of that goes on. Is there anybody else that wanted to comment? You can do the hand raising thing too if you don't have your camera on. Anybody? I know one thing that oh, go ahead, Kathy. Or are you just cleaning your screen?
I had to unmute. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I am.
Do you guys work with the League of Minnesota
Madam
Cities
Chair.
to offer?
John, you can
class?
go after Kathy. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay.
Does the Met Council work with the League of Minnesota Cities to offer a class to smaller cities on how to do their comp plans?
Angela?
I'm just going to leave my camera on. Thank you, Committee Member Hemke. We work with Metro Cities as well as all of the other local governments. Not everyone is a part of Metro Cities. We provide what Patrick mentioned earlier is the Planet Training Program, where that specifically walks through all of the basic requirements, all of the things that you can do to add value to your comprehensive plan. And that was pretty much a 2-year planning program for the people actually writing the plans, and it was all free and provided professional ed credits. So we tried to make it as appealing as possible for people to attend.
Well, I noticed that the League of Minnesota Cities was offering a land use workshop, and I was just curious if they were working with Met Council at all. on the comp plan part of that?
Well, since
sorry,
they
go ahead.
represent statewide rather than just the metro, they look at the land use laws that apply statewide, not the stuff that's particular to the Met Council comp plan process, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
I'll add too that we're often asked to speak at those kinds of things, and we're always happy to do that. So that's where we would partner with them. Whenever we're asked, we say yes.
But sometimes the people who really need it are the ones that don't go to those
Yeah.
programs. And so if we can take our show on the road to city councils and town boards, it's sometimes better to have a captive audience that way. John, you've been waiting very patiently. Would you like to have a turn?
Yes, I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to say this, but other people brought it up. For our town, the population percentages or the percentage growth was off in our town, according to Met Council's projections, was supposed to be twice as big as it is today. So I don't think there's a monopoly on bad projections from the city or Met Council. So I think we can probably all agree that projections from either source usually aren't 100% effective, and both sides make mistakes. I really do appreciate the effort here and the understanding and looking at some of the things that went wrong. I think what I want to be careful about, if on both sides, is it's like now we know as a collective, the Met Council knows and the city knows, and we're on the same page. But odds are pretty good that not all of us are, probably most of us are not going to be involved next time. So it's sort of like these lessons are well and good, but I want them to be part of the structural collaboration next time. So even if you take out the people, the structure is in place. So it's not as if the people have to remember these lessons. We have to have the process have these lessons in them. And I think it's a lot of it is people related, and that's good. But I'm just hoping that this gets more useful by the future people who are putting these together, by having it be a much more process oriented and structural. So thank you for listening, and I want to be cynical, but I'm not going to be cynical. I'm only going to be skeptical and say I'm hopeful that this is a much more collaborative process in the future. So thank you for that.
Agreed. Thank you. And I wasn't meaning to imply that the council's all knowing and never get things wrong. We certainly do get things wrong. And so thank you for bringing that up. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, institutionalizing this will be important, certainly. I mean, there's people in this meeting like myself. I'm here at the council. There's some people in this meeting who are local policymakers or staff planners. And, to really improve processes and communications, it needs to be institutionalized on both sides and communicated well and well thought out. And I think my professional kind of opinion is that's what we've discovered, that, yep, we need to do that. Yep, we need to do these things, and this is how we're going to do it. And so I hopefully, Mr. Bottom, your skepticism turns into, woo, you guys did great come 2028, something like that.
I plan on still being around. This is going to be my 4th round of comp plans. Are you going to say something, John?
I'm not sure. To be determined.
I accept that. Thank you.
I cut somebody off who was talking. Was that John? I don't know. Okay,
I think Wendy, I was starting to say something, but it was more relevant what John had to say. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? One thing that did occur to me was it kind of felt like the completeness aspect of the housing portion sort of was trying to turn it into a system. And I don't always know how relevant some of the things that are in there are, because if you have a council that says, yeah, we're going to use this and this and this tool when they do the comp plan, but then you have an election and you have a different council, just because it says it in the comp plan doesn't mean you're going to have the votes to put a particular tool into play 10 years later. So, I mean, it's something that we tried, but I don't know that it really makes a difference in real life, if that makes sense. I see some nods.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the comp plans are meant to be dynamic. Certainly, you're right. There's plenty of communities out there that said, no, absolutely no way, we're never going to use TIF. And then the mayor retires and a couple of council members come on, and pretty soon, they're like, yeah, we love TIF. And okay. So, the comp plans are meant to be dynamic. It's not, we need it to be set at a certain time so we can evaluate for conformance and consistency, of course. But we have an amendment process for a reason. So there's certainly nothing to stop a city from saying, yeah, these widely available housing tools, we're changing a couple. A couple we're not going to do, and a couple we said we weren't going to do in 2018. We're going to do them now. And we certainly are open to text amendments like that.
But in the grand scheme of things, it's sort of a clunky process to have to do a text amendment on something like that. I mean, like, I really, really love the mixed use things because we don't have people coming back with comp plan amendments saying, oh, we're moving this property line 30 feet, so our use is changing and we have to have an amendment. It just is a clunky process. That's just my comment. Anyway, anybody else? Last chance.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes, Jerry.
Yeah, the guy's comment, that was very good. Politics always plays a role in our life. And so comp plans are made at a point in time, but politics can always change everything. So comp plans have to have some way of being more flexible and, not so cut right down the center or something, I think. Politics is part of our life. It affects everything in our life. And it certainly is a part of comp plans. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Dan.
And I would just add that I think from my perspective, the thing that I wouldn't want to have to do is continue to do text amendments to the comp plan every time we change the tools that we're going to use. I would be happy to make changes if we decide to change our targets or our objectives. To me, the notion of putting tools in our comp plan is to give the Met Council evidence that we've thought about this and that we have some tools we're going to try to use to actually accomplish our objectives, rather than it feeling like it's something where every time we change the tools we use, we have to notify the comp plan of a text amendment and go through a 4-1 vote of our council and all those processes. So that's just my perspective on it, and I would hope that that's fairly widely shared.
That was kind of what I meant.
Might be important to remember that the comp plan is not just a policy legal document, it's also a communication tool.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Patrick and Angela. And we will move on to our next item. Thank you, everybody that commented too. It's always helpful to get feedback for our staff. Community designations with Raya Esmaeili.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, yeah, I was going to say, Angela, go ahead.
Do you mind if I interject here for just a moment again?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Raya is going to be your presenter, so never fear, you just see me here for a moment. I wanted to make one more quick connection to for the committee to the regional planning process as part of, sorry. As part of, sorry, I had some other things pop up. As part of looking forward to the 2050 Regional Development Guide, we take a look at components of the existing regional policy to assess how well they work in furthering the implementation of regional policy. You'll find throughout the work plan this year that there's a number of smaller sub-projects that will eventually go into building the larger regional development guide, what we call right now Thrive MSP 2040. So it's actually scary to think, but it's the 2050 plan. Some of those sub-projects will be really familiar, things like regional forecasts that I think many of you are familiar with through the comp planning process. But a lot of these things are kind of in process at the same time. And so you'll see some stacking, some iterative processes. And really what we're trying to do is today kind of kick off the land use policy analysis that will be on LUAC's work planning agenda throughout the rest of the year. Community designations is kind of the first piece of that. So I'll just ask Raya to go ahead with her presentation now.
Thank you, Angela. So if we can see the presentation now, that would be great. While that's happening, I'll let you know, like I'm Raya Smiley. I don't think I've presented to you in a while. I'm a senior planner in local planning assistance, and along with Dbeef, who you all know, managing this project, the community designation project. Jake Riley is also on our team, who you already met. With that, next slide, please. Okay, so as Angela mentioned, the 2050 regional planning process has already been launched to create the next regional development guide and the associated policy plans. The community designations is an essential part of this effort for a variety of reasons, and some of you are familiar with them through Thrive MSP 2040. The community designations are generally an important component because they help further regional policy outcomes through the direction that they set forth. They're used to plan and implement those regional policies at the local level. Based on community designation, land use policies and density expectations are developed. Community designations are a way to distinguish differences and also uniqueness of communities in the region, as well as any similarities that the communities may have amongst each other. Community designations set the direction for growth based on where urban infrastructure exists, and also, on the other hand, try to protect natural areas and agricultural land. Next slide, please. So we thought that it would be helpful to start with a bit of history on community designations at this point. The first regional development guide was the Metropolitan Development Framework Guide that was adopted in 1975. This was less than 10 years after the Metropolitan Land Planning Act. Something to note is that before we get to Thrive MSP 2040, you will hear me reference these areas with a variety of terms. In this case, you'll see on the map it says generalized policy areas. So community designations were not called community designations until Thrive MSP 2040. So prior to that, in this case, they had a different name. And then the Metropolitan Development Framework Guide divided the region into two major service areas, the urban service area and the rural service area, and then developed geographic planning areas that are, as I mentioned, called generalized policy areas in this case. The map here shows those areas, but also it shows the areas that are called metropolitan centers and also freestanding growth centers. Next slide, please. In 1986, the Metropolitan Development and Investment Framework was adopted. always worried that I'm going to switch these words around. So this development guide reaffirmed that urban-rural concept that was in the previous one, and then extended the Metropolitan Urban Service Area, or MUSA, to year 2000. It also continued with that definition of metropolitan centers and the freestanding growth centers. And it did additionally refine policy areas for commercial agricultural areas. And next slide, please. Thank you. The next one was adopted in 1996. It was called the Regional Blueprint. Again, MUSA concept continued. The boundary of the maximum long-term service area for regional services was defined all the way to year 2040. Any land outside of 2040 was planned to remain permanently rural or permanently agricultural, as you can see on this map with that lighter blue and the one with the dots. This plan, as you can see in the on the map, it discontinued the metropolitan centers and freestanding growth centers. And then what else that I would like to say here is that the areas in this map are called growth strategy policy areas. So again, different names, same concept. Next slide, please. Then in 2004, we're getting close, the Regional Development Framework was adopted. It defined geographic planning areas as developed or developing in urban planning areas, and then a variety of rural planning areas. So at this point, community designations are called geographic planning areas. The map kind of, this map shows that the Regional Development Framework continued that distinction between urban and rural. And then again, try to go into a little more detail about rural areas. The framework did not include different levels of protection for agricultural land, but it also didn't include as I mentioned in the previous one, metropolitan centers or regional business concentrations, and also the freestanding growth centers. So those are continued to not be included. Next slide, please. And now, Thrive MSP 2040 was adopted in May of 2014. The map that you see on the screen is actually updated as of August of 2021 because some of these community designations changed through the comprehensive plan update and amendment process in the past few years. Thrive continued that urban-rural divide very distinctively. Under urban service area, the designations are urban center, urban, suburban edge, and emerging suburban edge. And then the rural service area are rural center, diversified rural, rural residential, and agricultural. So one difference that you see here that is distinctive compared to the previous ones is that Thrive refined the urban service area much more. Like it created more categories under urban service area as compared to the previous plans. So these community designations were created based on, in case of Thrive, based on 5 factors. Those factors are the Metropolitan Urban Service Area, or MUSA, percentage of developable land that's committed to urban use, age of housing stock, which was used as a proxy for age of infrastructure and general development patterns, intersection density, which is basically an element to indicate connectivity and urban form, and the long-term wastewater service area. All these 5 factors together through a spatial analysis basically produce these community designations that you see on the screen. Next slide, please. Okay, now that we've covered the history, let's take a look at this project that we have before us. The Community Designation Project is going to be a very iterative process throughout all of this year. The two main components of it are engagement and analysis. So as part of the Community Designation project, we are planning a pretty robust stakeholder engagement, and which would include both external and internal partners. The external partners that we currently have identified include an existing focus group through Metro Cities, and also we're putting together a focus group of local planners, and we're hoping to have a little more emphasis on the township rural land use considerations, since community designations do play a pretty big role in the more rural areas or communities that are around the edge of the urban service area. Our internal stakeholder engagement includes staff that are from all of the technical areas. These include land use, housing, research, which is the forecast folks are under research, parks, transit, transportation, wastewater, surface water, and water supply. So our internal technical staff will help us identify what kind of impact community designations have in their respective areas that these technical staff work in, and how this process can be improved from the last round in connection with their work and also other policy areas that all of these staff are working on. One other thing is that we are engaging with council committees. Of course, mainly LUAC is the main body that the Community Designations Project will be presented at. You are one of our very main stakeholders, and you are the body who would be recommending the final option for community designations for Community Development Committee and the Metropolitan Council to adopt. We're hoping by the end of 2022, and we'll talk about that. And then the other body that, like LUAC is, as you have seen in your work plan, you are going to be working with MOSAC. So that is something that through the communication that we have with you, we are hoping to engage in some other areas in that sense as well. One other committee is Committee of the Whole of the Metropolitan Council. This would be the opportunity that we're going to use as a project team to connect with council members and engage them in conversations related to community designations, seek feedback, and present some of the information that we will gather throughout the process. The second component of the, actually, before I go there, I forgot the last bullet point. As I mentioned, that whole 2050 regional planning process, ongoing process, it involves a lot of different efforts. Some of these, well, actually all of these projects that are ongoing have different components that intersect with one another, including with community designation. So we will be coordinating with these efforts and projects to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing, our deliverables, our timelines, and our engagement efforts, they're all aligning with one another. I know that I believe that actually, let me just mention a few of them. For example, we have scenario planning, we have land use modeling, we have visioning, and we have equity task force. Like all of these efforts that are ongoing as part of the 2050 planning process are work that we will be coordinating with through the Community Designations Project. Now, the analysis is the technical component of the project. One thing, we will start by evaluating the current community designations and also their effectiveness in the 2040 process to see what has worked and what hasn't. Some of this information will come from the debrief that you just heard, there will be quite a bit of work to try to see how some of that feedback that has already been received is connected with community designations specifically, or is it connected with other areas that that the council will be working on in the future. Then accordingly, we will review and adjust those previous approaches. Components that were included, like variables that were included in the past, and any actual analysis that was done, and those approaches are things that we will be evaluating. Then we will, through our engagement, we are trying to not only identify what works and what didn't, but also any additional variables that we need to consider in this effort in order to analyze them through that spatial analysis and come up with new community designations. So all of this is, as I mentioned, is a very iterative process. There will be a lot of analyzing, gathering feedback, putting together an analysis, and then presenting that analysis, gathering feedback, changing or refining that analysis based on the feedback, then presenting it. So there's quite a bit of an iterative process that will be ongoing throughout 2022. Next slide, please. So this is a quick look at the preliminary timeline. One thing to mention is that this is a pretty ambitious schedule. It may need to be adjusted following our initial engagement or some of that efforts that we're doing in aligning different projects in the regional planning work. As I mentioned, your committee is the main recommending body for this effort. We will continuously engage with you throughout the 2022 as you will be providing guidance for this process. You're the main body who will be reviewing all the analysis, the refinements that we are doing through that iterative process, and then finally making that final recommendation to CDC. We will then be working with you. So aside from this meeting, which is kind of setting the stage, we will be working with you at every single meeting that you have in 2022. And then the current goal is for this committee to be able to make your final recommendation to CDC at your November meeting, but maybe even at September, but we'll see. But that is, again, as I mentioned, preliminary timeline. We're hoping that we can abide by it. The stakeholder engagement is also an ongoing part of the project. We're starting the stakeholder engagement this month by convening the different groups. So we have sent out a notice to local planners asking them to sign up as part of that focus group, and we are going to do some direct outreach as well to make sure that we have good representation on that focus group. The goal of it is the engagement is to gather feedback and analyze the feedback through new variables through the spatial analysis. With that iterative process, we are prepared to continue these efforts for most of the duration of this project. After the project kickoff and initial stakeholder meeting, we will start the analysis by April. Using that spatial analysis, we will assess different variables and develop options for community designations to present to you and other stakeholders. Most of the discussions at that point will be around implications of different options and how to provide as much flexibility possible and how to minimize any adverse impact. So those are some of the discussions that we're hoping to have. Like, what does it mean? Like, how could these community designations impact local policy and regional policy and local policy moving forward? And then based on those discussions, we will refine the options and then present them again until we reach that final one for you to recommend to CDC for the anticipated adoption by the council in December of this year. Next slide, please. So the deliverable for this project are a set of criteria for defining community designation. This is basically those 5 that I mentioned for Thrive. We want a similar set of criteria for community designations for the 2050, plan. Proposed community designations themselves for each jurisdiction. Descriptions of each community designation. So in Thrive MSP 2040, these descriptions kind of try to talk about the similarities of the communities and the areas within each community designation. Another deliverable is density expectation based on community designation. And then finally, any maps and other data that we would need for community designations. Next slide, please. Now, the feedback that we are requesting from committee members today is, well, whether there are any initial questions or feedback you have right now. Based on your background and expertise, do you know of any existing gaps or themes that you have observed in the current community designations? Do you know of or would like to discuss some points of similarities and differences between communities, and whether you have any preference for frequency and method of communication? As I mentioned, LUAC is the main advisory body that we will be working with throughout this whole process, and you will be making the final recommendation to CDC and Council for adoption. And we will be presenting at every LUAC meeting throughout 2022 to gather your feedback on the process and discuss different options. But if you have any other or additional preferences, I would like to ask you to share that with us right now. With that, I am happy to answer any questions and or hear any feedback that you have.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Here.
Is that Jerry?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Oh, Jerry.
Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to make a comment. When you talk about all this material here tonight, very interesting, very good job of presentation. Very impressed with that. But I just have to say, since I represent Carver County, is that, it seems to us out here that the Met Council really represents and really spends their time in cities and not the rural areas. Now, I'm not complaining or being critical of anything, because I think rural people tend to want to be left alone anyway. But I think Met Council policies and the way they address issues and the way their fiscal policies tend to favor the cities in the inner ring. So these are just comments and thoughts of mine. You asked for them, and as you know me, I'm glad to tell you that. Thank you. And very good presentation. Thank you.
This year you'll have all the opportunity you want to bring up the rural issues in our discussion. So you do you, Jerry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, I just, I was looking again at the designations and some of the history, and it seemed like we may be in a pretty good place with the Thrive 2040 designations. So I wondered if a legitimate outcome of this process could be largely the status quo in terms of designations, and maybe just tweaking which municipalities fall under which designation. And then the second question was, I noted that sort of the urban core downtowns essentially as a designation went away as far as like downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, and wondered if that was something that might make sense to bring back in as part of the consideration. But otherwise, largely, I thought it seemed the existing designations fit fairly well.
If I may respond to the 2 comments so
Yes,
far.
go ahead.
So the comment about rural areas not, or the council not paying as much attention to rural areas, I think we recognize the importance of community designations and some of the land use policies specifically in rural areas. For urban areas, a lot of the a lot of the difference for that community designations brought forth was just about density expectations, whereas in rural areas, especially areas around the edge of MUSA, it has a lot to do with what areas are or are not served by the wastewater system. So the worries and the what matters in those areas are quite different, which is why we're hoping and aiming at paying specific attention to those areas. One of the ways that we're going to do that is, as I mentioned, through that focus group. So we are hoping to kind of create a subgroup or subspecialty, if you will, of rural township planners, if possible, to be able to in more detail discuss community designations as they relate to rural areas, so that we are better able to capture some of the shortcomings of previous planning efforts. So I hope that alleviates some of your worry at least, but thank you so much for that comment. We've definitely noted that. As
Madam,
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you for that. Put me on that list. I'd be glad to serve on it. All right.
Great. Done. Actually, I've already known your name.
All right. Thank you.
And one other thing about Thrive, that the comment about whether or not it could practically be the same, that could be an outcome, to be honest. We'll see how the community designations are going to change, like even honestly, even including using the same criteria could be different. However, there are some elements that were not necessarily of much focus in the last round that could make a difference this round. Like this round, for example, we have a place-based equity data set that we're hoping to use throughout the process that we didn't have in the last round. So those, for example, could make a difference in how the community designations will turn out. In terms of urban core itself did go away. However, there is the urban center community designation instead, which was, I think, and maybe Angela or someone else with a little more background can talk about that. But I think the intention was to not single out Minneapolis and St. Paul, but recognize that there are areas, other cities as well, who are kind of in the same boat. So I'm trying to take a look at the map. There's like a 6 or 7 communities, I think, with the urban center designation in the last round. So I don't know whether or not something like urban core that would single Minneapolis and St. Paul out would come out of this process, but I have noted your comment.
The other thing that will be going on is we're adding another 10 years of Seward growth to the plan. And this last round, it was easy because we pretty much said the 2030 MUSA is the 2040 MUSA because we lost a decade of growth with the recession. That will be up for discussion for this next round. So there may be areas being added to the Seward service area post 2040 that will now be in the plan for when it goes to 2050. And I know John dealt with a city coming kind of into the Seward world with his plan. That's a big step. There's a lot of planning things that go along with that. So John might be a key person to talk to for places that are coming into the Seward world.
It's a lot of fun. Don't
If I may, just the reason that I had brought up the sort of the downtown being different than the rest of St. Paul or Minneapolis is that there may be more commonality between the further portions of Minneapolis and St. Paul and their neighboring suburban communities, rather than commonality between those portions of Minneapolis and St. Paul and their downtown areas, which are much more dense, much more intense in terms of use and things like that. That was my only point in wondering whether it made sense to look at that distinction. So just putting that out there.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm not seeing any hands raised or people actually waving at me in their cameras. If you think of anything later, you can always email Raya and give her more feedback, because this is your chance. This is the big thing that you get to vote on when you're on LUAC. So the more information we can provide her, the more likely we have a outcome that people can support. So thank you for your presentation. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda. Deb, did you have anything that you wanted to share?
Chair Wulff, I would
Yes.
just add that I was part of this effort during the last round, and it was something that I felt LUAC members took very, very seriously and examined a number of options and really gave us good feedback and direction. So I can see it being a very consequential role for LUAC.
I'm looking forward to it. I wasn't involved the last time because I had to leave LUAC because I was a council member and not the chair of LUAC. So this is a first time for me, but looking forward to it.
Oh, and just one more comment, Chair Wulff.
Mm-hmm.
Today's presentation is setting up our continued work by the Committee on Community Designations, but you will have a lot of opportunities for discussion coming up.
Great.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Jerry.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that, because I believe that the members of this LUAC committee, you know what, the Met Council should rely on them for their wisdom and their inputs, clearly. And I also I singled out Raya, but Patrick's presentation was awfully good too. One thing I've learned, I may belong to a political party that may be critical of certain things, but I'm not one of them. I think the staff at the Met Council is very good at what they do. So, and I say this when I'm amongst friends. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Jerry. Anybody want to have the last word? One more chance. Going. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your participation. We look forward to filling you full of a bunch more information so we can make some decisions for the next round of comp plans. And there being no further business to come before the committee, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.